Show me your heart. I know that it's beating. Tell me that you love me too. So I know your heart is true. 'Cause I need some proof of love. 'Cause I need some proof of love. 'Cause I need some proof of love. This episode of Proof of Love is brought to you by Vaultoro. Vaultoro is a gold hedging solution for the crypto community. One of the challenges of investing in cryptocurrencies is dealing with volatility. Keeping a diversified portfolio is a key to healthy returns. I keep about 10% of my crypto assets in gold using Vaultoro. Vaultoro allows me to open a gold wallet in seconds where I can trade easily with cryptos and gold. What I like about using Vaultoro instead of Tether is that the gold in my Vaultoro wallet is insured, audited, vaulted in Switzerland, and unlike fiat money, gold has increased in value for the last 20 years. Visit vaultoro.gold/Tatiana today and get zero trading fees for the first 3 months. That is vault, like a gold vault, and oro, which is Spanish for gold. Vaultoro, ale. I want to talk about Celsius Network. They're doing a really cool thing, trying to revolutionize the way we think about financial services. Basically, they're offering their users up to 10% annual interest on their crypto deposit, and there's no secret to how they're doing it. That 10% comes from them sharing 80% of their profits, rather than the minuscule percentage the banks share. Celsius is giving our users $10 in BTC when they make a deposit of $200 or more in crypto or stablecoins when they use promo code LOVE. Go to Celsius.network. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Proof of Love. Today, we're going to be talking with Edward Vilga, and he's going to be talking to us about getting into the right mindset, a little bit of yoga, some money talk. So I'm excited. This is Stephanie's guest pick of the week. I know that she's always got really interesting things that she's listening to. Unfortunately, Lauren is in Japan, so she's not hanging with us today. But Dr. Stephanie Murphy, thank you for joining us on Proof of Love.
Hey, Tatiana, and hey, Edward, thank you so much for joining us today. You know, I wanted to invite you on the show because I got an email from the Daily Om, which is, you know, like a spiritual mailing list. And you have some courses in the Daily Om that are about money and getting into the right mindset. And specifically, the one that I saw was what to do if you're experiencing a financial freakout. And I just thought this was the greatest thing because, you know, who doesn't experience a financial freakout now and then? I know all of us on the show have struggled with this. And when you talk about personal development, ideas about money are really tied in with ideas about self-worth and ideas about, are you lovable? Like, are you enough? And so I thought it was a great topic to explore on the show. So welcome and thank you for joining us.
I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
So let's just jump right into it. I mean, how did you...
Actually, if we could, I'd love to just give a quick breakdown on our guest. So Edward creates breakthrough wellness experiences in books, bodies, and bank accounts for a global audience. He also consults with corporations and other businesses interested in moving into the wellness market. He is the author of 17 best-selling books, DVDs, and online courses. And over 50,000 students are enrolled in his online courses. That's a lot, including A Year to Get Rich with Purpose on Daily Om. And then his most recent book is #1 in New Thought on Amazon. He recently created a Meditation of the Month Club on his website, edwardvilga.com. And you can check him out on all the internets. So Edward Vilga on Instagram, Edward Vilga Industries on Facebook. Check it out if you guys are listening to this and thinking, who is this guy? But take it away, Steph.
Well, So Edward, I want to ask you, how did you get interested in the intersection of, I guess, personal growth or spirituality and finance?
Well, it's an interesting thing. I mean, essentially I was interested in it for my own life, trying to understand how money worked and all of the emotional and spiritual and psychological components of it. But what led me to go into it deeper and to start teaching it is that I realized that I couldn't quite find certain answers that I wanted. I couldn't find things that were both practical and also, for want of a better word, spiritual. I could find all these sort of creative visualization books or law of attraction things. And then I could find the other side of it, which was, super practical about interest rates and student loan repayment, plan, like just really, really practical things. And I thought, it's interesting because they're obviously so deeply connected in our real life experience that I began to research and then began teaching from that.
Right. I mean, that's totally resonating with me a lot. Like, I can't think of any resources that are both practical and also have a spiritual or personal growth oriented side to them. And, this is ridiculous when you think about it because money is such an important topic. We all need to learn how to manage our money, and nobody really teaches us about it. In fact, most people don't even like to talk about it. I mean, I don't know about you, but the family and the school that I grew up in, there wasn't that much talk about money, What about you?
Well, no, it's the same thing. I mean, there are, of course, exceptions, but I found in general that people are much more willing to talk about their sex life than their financial lives. It's much easier to get somebody to tell you some adventure they've had or something than it is to have an honest discussion about how much they make or how much debt they have. Not that they need to do that, but I think it's in some ways this taboo subject in all sorts of different directions. People who are ashamed of their finances or people who are doing really well and feel they have to hide that.
Yeah, I mean, well, you have to talk about it if you're going into a relationship with someone, right? Because if you're going to merge your life with someone, that includes often at least some level of merging your finances. And money is one of the biggest things that couples fight about. And probably that's because they just don't talk about it enough.
Absolutely. And I mean, you should, but a lot of people don't. And I think a lot of people in long-term relationships still struggle with this. Partners might have very different attitudes towards money. And different philosophies towards it. One person could be checked out about it. I mean, I've seen all these different kinds of scenarios, but the bottom line is that absolutely good communication about it is vitally important.
Okay, well, this might be a little bit of a tangent from what we wanted to talk about today, but I'm curious, like, if you're just starting a relationship with someone and you're trying to get to know them for long-term compatibility, maybe even marriage, where you're going to be merging your finances, what questions should you ask them to see if you're on the same page about your attitudes about money?
Well, I don't think you need to start your first date asking for their tax returns.
Not the first date, yeah, but as the relationship grows.
But I do think I mean, I would sort of get more specific with time. I think you might notice the person's attitude towards money, is one thing. Whether it's easy for them or a struggle, whether they seem to be doing well or not doing well, whether they are generous or not. So, I mean, you might just start with kind of a bigger picture. And also, even their own, you can kind of get a sense of people's awareness around money. I know people who are very rich who don't open their trust fund statements. And I know people who are, look at every item on their, credit card bill with a fine-tooth comb. So I think, partly there isn't a specific, you must know this or do that, but you have to sort of feel like, is this going to be compatible? And sometimes opposites are great, and sometimes they're not.
Right.
I don't think in money opposites are particularly good. I don't know. I think it's important to be in line, at least on that one page.
Well, I think so, but sometimes people can complement each other. I mean, I have known relationships and marriages where one person handled this and the other person didn't. I'm not advocating that necessarily. I think some awareness is good, but I do think sometimes that can work for a while.
Edward, is there like a range of healthy attitudes about money, or would you even avoid labeling different attitudes as healthy or unhealthy? What about like limiting beliefs that people have around money, and which ones are kind of oriented towards financial well-being and which ones are not?
Well, it's a broad range of things. I mean, I think that, for example, and I've written about this in a couple of the courses, as just a really practical exercise. One of them is constructing a safety net. Sometimes it's called an emergency fund. I think that sounds a little more dramatic, but and there are people who would simply say it must be X months of income. Sometimes it's 3 months, sometimes it's 6 months. But when I take people through those kind of exercises, a lot of it has to do with how old you are and what you're pursuing and what your obligations are and whether you're responsible for other people and what industry you work in, so that a safety net for a young actor slash waiter in New York is going to be very different than someone who has 3 children and a corporate job that's going to be very hard to replace and has a mortgage. So all of those have to do with both personality and also risk averse, how risk averse you are and how much security you need to feel good. There's an example in my book of someone who really did say to me with a straight face that they could not sleep at night if their emergency cash fund, the cash fund, went below $2 million. And I just,
Wow.
What emergencies are you encountering? Like a once in a lifetime sale on helicopters? It's but it may have made sense for them, but that was simply how they live their life. And then I have another best friend who's a stylist who is running around the town, and I'm often, advancing small amounts of money to, make sure the cell phone doesn't get disconnected, and they're happy as can be.
Right. It's so funny how people are so different about that. So, I mean, like, what do you think is underlying this person who said that they can't sleep at night unless they have $2 million in cash? Like, what kind of beliefs or attitudes are underneath that?
Well, there may be some economic reality. There might be something of, I'm sure there is something specific, whether it's I own these properties and I don't want to lose them. But I think, I think it's variable. It's really, what do you need to feel secure? And sometimes it's a very well calculated thing, like this will cover me if the stock market crashes and, I'll be fine for 2 years. And sometimes it's just a lot of times it's a magical number someone's made up, like that's what being rich is. And so it really depends. And I mean, and I don't think that there's a right or wrong, like you should be more risk averse or you should be braver. I think the most important thing is you begin to find out what's right for you.
So you're bringing mindfulness to the concept of money. I mean, I guess what I'm getting at is, does this come from our childhood? Does it come from other beliefs we have about how worthy we are of love? Like, do we confuse love with money?
Absolutely. I mean, it comes from a lot of places. It definitely comes from childhood and upbringing. And I think there are many variations of this. There are people for whom money represents different things. I mean, their money might mean freedom, and it might mean I need this much to be free. Or it might be, the measure of self-worth, that I am a success and I can measure it in dollars, and it can sometimes be, utterly wonderful and healthy and balanced. So it's the widest possible range. What's interesting is that nobody ever really, it's not taught or trained in that way. It's all sort of things you pick up, and either, consciously or unconsciously.
So I'm wondering, are there any universal financial tips, despite where somebody's headspace is at? Like when somebody comes to you and they say, I want to make more money or something, like, do you say, get a savings account or put aside $20 every week? Like, what are some more concrete things that people can do to just increase their money flow? Or is it just, I don't know, like imagining it. I don't think the imagining is specifically what you're proposing, but I mean, what can people do? What do you walk through people when you start working with them?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I'm sort of working now with groups, and I'm not a financial planner. I know a bunch from my reading, but I don't take people and look at their numbers and tell them what to do. I have a partner on projects who does do that. He's a Wharton MBA, and he's vibey and spiritual, and we have a membership that's actually closed now. There's a wait list, but we do have an ongoing thing where we sort of we have both of our hats on. But in terms of general things, I mean, I think the most important thing that I start almost every course or everything I teach with is self-acceptance. because I've found that almost everyone, not everyone, but almost everybody has some degree of shame or guilt around their financial story. There's
Yes.
there's usually a lot of negative emotion to get through. And it
Interesting.
might be that they blame themselves. It might maybe that they blame somebody. It might be that they feel they should be further along, or they've made these mistakes, or they've neglected it. But as a universal practical first step, I think self-acceptance is vital.
What if you've been doing something bad? Maybe you shouldn't accept yourself. I mean, some people are just really, really reckless with money. Do you think that everybody deserves self-acceptance? I'm not trolling you. I'm asking like a genuine question.
Oh no,
'Cause I
I
think that
that's
there are some people that are a-holes with money. They borrow money, they don't return it, they go on trips. I mean, I don't know if they need to be accepting this about themselves.
Well, I think that's a very good question. So actually, I think one of the most common questions because the Daily Own course is so many people, and I try and answer in the chat room as much as I can, but the most common question, I think, are about the idea of self-acceptance and people feeling, and I understand why people would go there, is thinking self-acceptance is not the same thing as complacency. Self-acceptance, the most common version of the question is, if I accept this, am I saying it's going to stay the same? And the answer to that is no. But you can't, it's like quicksand emotionally, which is if you're beating yourself up, or you're stuck in a bad behavior, or you're in denial, or you are looking at your past with all this regret, you have to stop that. You have to probably change the behavior. You have to do other things first. But until you come to a point of being willing to say, okay, that's what happened, let's move on, and stop torturing yourself, you really can't make any changes.
Oh, wow. That resonates so much with me. um, so, okay, Edward, there's a lot of people in the space that are just maybe what you would describe as too focused on the sort of spiritual aspect of finances, where, for example, I hear a lot of people saying like, oh, just think about it. Like, just imagine yourself getting checks and they'll appear in your mailbox like that. This is
Yeah.
like the law of attraction stuff. Where do you fall on that? Do you think that is a little bit fantastical sometimes? And I mean, especially if you don't really believe it, it seems to me like it could backfire.
I think it's really tricky, because I think that yes, there's a lot of there's in certain aspects of it, there's data that visualization does work, whether it's tests with athletes and things like that. Have I had experience where I've imagined something and felt it and done everything right with law of attraction and it's worked out beautifully? Yes. Has it not worked out? Sure, a lot of the times. And then you can always go back and beat yourself up. I didn't believe enough, or I wasn't aligned. But what I think is important, and that's, going back to the very beginning question you asked me, is that I think it's both things. I mean, I think there's a spiritual, emotional component to money, and there's a hardcore practical component to it. And so ideally, you're working with both parts of it. You're not just creating a vision board and then sitting back. You might want to create the vision board and then work on your resume.
Right. Okay. So it has to be a balance between the spiritual and the practical.
Absolutely.
That makes sense. So, okay, it sounds like step one, if you're really in a crisis mode about your finances, step one is feeling the feelings and then moving through the feelings of guilt and shame and accepting where you're at. Would you say that's right?
Absolutely. And also, in answer to the to Tatiana's question earlier, it's about if you have bad behavior, I'm not saying accept it and keep doing it, but just sort of say, okay, I've been profligate, I've been a little crazy here, I'm going to change this, but not beat yourself up, really decide to make a healthy change.
Oh gosh, yeah, that's like the eternal tension between self-acceptance but then also wanting to change.
Yeah.
So how do you balance that? Okay, so what's step two after you've gotten to a place of greater self-acceptance? Do you then start trying to implement some of the changes, maybe based on the more practical side?
Well, it depends. Again, since I'm speaking to a mass audience, it would depend, but on the person. But but what the next step usually in my courses and things is about getting grounded. Now, some people might be very, very grounded, and by that I mean, looking at their numbers. I'm always astonished at the number of people who are in a fog about that. Like they don't know very basic things. Like they might kind of have a sense of how much is in their bank account, but they might not really know how much they make a year. They might have a very fuzzy understanding of it all. So I think the next step then is getting really clear about what you owe, what you make, where all of those elements.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
I'm
that's super important. I like my financial spreadsheet. Like, I don't consider myself to be the most financially responsible person in the world, but I definitely know what's coming in and what's coming out. And just learning basic QuickBooks early on when I was working on studios was really helpful. I mean, I'm not a genius with that by any means, but just to be able to process invoices, a lot of people don't even have an invoicing system, And
Yeah.
I don't know, that shocks me. I mean, as a small business owner, I think you have to be able to do all that stuff. It's just unacceptable not to, but I mean, people are varying with that. So even writing out like a crappy Excel spreadsheet that says this month, this is what I have to spend will put you in a completely different mindset in terms of reality. I mean, it might be a little depressing, but I mean, then you can implement some goals.
Even writing it on a napkin would be better than nothing.
Right. And then you go back to step one, self-acceptance. I mean, it's sort of like, okay, this is what it is. But you're, that's fantastic, whether it's Quicken or QuickBooks or a spreadsheet or the napkin. The majority of people, and these are a lot of people taking my course through the Daily Ohm, but so many of them, and it's not just that, it's not because they're vibey and spiritual. I know a lot of people who are just don't want to look at it for whatever set of reasons, whether they think somebody else is going to handle this, or a lot of people, particularly women, I've run into who say, I'm just not good with money,
That's a great excuse to buy shoes.
Yeah, exactly. It's sort of like, and there's a kind of, oh, it'll all work out. I've always been fine, but I think, as a definite next step, it's getting grounded and then seeing what comes up around that and then beginning to move forward.
Do you think that, sorry, I have a quick question. So we're both New York based. Do you think that New York has a certain kind of mentality around money? Because I think it's a lot more competitive than other places. Do you find some special challenges dealing with New Yorkers?
Well, I am, with these things, it's kind of a global audience. So I don't always know where people are from. But in my own New York experience, I mean, I think everything is just amped up. It's like the costs are bigger, rent is higher, salaries are bigger, people are more ambitious. So I just think it's just sort of like on everything that I teach is on steroids kind of in New York.
Yeah, I would think so. Steph, did you want to go?
Yeah, I was just like thinking, when you were saying people don't want to look at their finances, Edward, I was like thinking of all these stories of, friends that had said, I don't even want to log into my online banking to look at the balance because I know it's just going to be so uncomfortable.
I know.
I have been that person, by the way. I'm not gonna act like I've never been that person, because there are certain times where you just don't even want to look at what's happening. I don't know. I mean,
I've been that person too. I mean, it's sort of we don't want to get the bad news, or we don't want to see how big the amount we owe is, or there's not enough. And it's such an obvious mistake, but it's such obvious human nature. You are better off knowing than not knowing.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, that was my second thought after I thought of the stories of the friends who have done this, was that I have done this too.
I've done it, yeah.
So I'm not judging anyone, certainly not. But what do you do about the discomfort, right? Like sometimes it's just so uncomfortable to do something that it just feels so much easier to avoid it. Like, how do you move past that discomfort or move through the discomfort? Is it like meditation, like knowing that everything is temporary, or what?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a good question. And it actually, something you said just reminds me first, is that I found that a lot of the practical money people, and I don't need to name names, but and with books and specials and things, are very, very shaming. They part of their power and their audience appeal, and some people want this, is that they make you feel bad about your bad decisions. Like, you're a bad person and how could you have done that? And I don't do that, and I don't think it's helpful, but I also don't think it's largely true. I think people are, for the most part, trying to do the best they can, even when they're making silly mistakes or even terrible mistakes. But it all keeps coming back to that idea of self-acceptance, which is, and there's a million ways to do it. And so usually in like the year-long course with De Leon and other ones, I offer guided meditations, but I'm always, stressing to people, look at your numbers and then, remember how you begin to feel better. I mean, alignment is a good word, how you feel realigned. Is it a walk through nature? Is it a movie? Is it is it music? But you've got to practice self-care around it. Because again, no one really teaches you, make sure you look at your money stuff, whatever the amount is, every day, once a week, balance your checkbook. And if you feel sad or depressed or guilty or frightened, do this to make yourself feel better.
Yeah, I've literally never heard anyone even mention that before. So this is great that we're talking about it.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because I was taught to brush my teeth, frequently and things like that. And I think my parents might have had some, very, very vague things like it's good to save, but I wasn't ever instructed on this is really how you will build a successful financial life. And I think that's most people.
Do you think that's on purpose?
I think they didn't have it, and so they didn't quite know how to do it. And I think that there's often, again, these layers of embarrassment and shame and things that I think they, like most things, I think they did the best they could, but they didn't really know what to tell me.
Right. Okay. So it's not a conspiracy. It's just that everyone has shame and guilt around these topics. And so they just avoid talking about them.
Yeah,
okay.
Or doesn't know, or feels they don't know enough, or who am I to tell you, or you'll figure it out, or, I think there's a whole bunch of that.
Right. Okay, so Edward, we have a lot of creatives in our audience, and both Tatiana and I are creative professionals. I'm a voice actor, she's a singer-songwriter, and she also does a lot of other things, all creative stuff. And I think that, encountering a lot of other creative people in our work, we come across a lot of people who are like struggling with this idea of how to make money and pay the bills as an artist, but also maintain your integrity and your artistic, staying true to your artistic vision and maintaining your creative freedom and things like that. Is there necessarily a tension between those things? Can you be an artist who pays the bills? And how do you do that?
It's a really good question. And it's something I thought a lot about because, I'm doing this kind of wisdom teaching now, but I've also written a lot of other things and directed a lot of other things. I think one thing that's doesn't help is that there's a very true myth of the starving artist. I think that
I agree.
And I think
total poverty mentality. I mean, it's ongoing. I struggle with that all the time. And I think sometimes I underbid things, and a lot of artists I know struggle with that all the time. It's something you have to overcome pretty pointedly.
Absolutely. And I think, the only good thing about it is that sometimes it can make you feel like, well, I'm not alone, or I haven't, I'm not a bad person, but it sets up this framework where it's very hard to succeed. If you go into this world saying, as an artist, you're probably not going to succeed. You'll probably, fall into this cliche of the starving artist. You're making it harder for yourself, through just buying into the worldview that's presented to you. It would be interesting if, another model were created, because I can imagine it in theory being like, oh, well, you're a creative artist. That means you're super creative and resourceful and imaginative and good at expressing yourself. That means it's so much more likely you're going to make a lot of money than anybody else.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, but nobody ever teaches you that, or no one ever said. I think I'm the first person who's ever said that. In that, it's like, if people said, "Oh, you're an artist," well, that's so great. You're gonna have so many skills that are gonna help you make so much money with what you love doing.
Yeah, but people really love artists and stuff. They're pretty nice to you, at the very least. I think you get some perks. You know, because you feel I find a lot of people, as a musician, a lot of people wanted to pursue music and they weren't able to do that. So I mean, yeah, people think you're poor, but they still think what you do is much cooler than what they're doing, which doesn't really help when you need, health insurance or something.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
they appreciate you're rich in other ways, either
Well,
way.
right, and that's the same trade-off, which is that it's still the same mentality, which is, this belief, oh, you're an artist, like you must have this great, wonderful, passionate life, but no money.
That's
Yeah.
true.
That's the assumption.
And it's often, it's not invalid, but I think, it's sort of is that just a thing that is a truth that we can't get past because that's just how things work out, or how much of that belief system is creating that truth and perpetuating it?
Yeah. Well, how do you think that people can get out of that mindset? I mean, I guess we're talking about some of these things. People can sign up for it on the Daily Omer. Do you have to, because you said it's a year-long course. Are they middle of the year, so now they can't do it?
No. There's a whole bunch of things. There's I have stuff on the Daily Home, which is pay what you want. If you go to my website, there's a free meditation of the month club, so you'll just get you get information on things. But there's the Daily Home course. The most popular one is the year-long one, and you can start that whenever you want. There's another thing which is there's a wait list for, which is a sort of intensive, which is more directly working with me and my business partner Stefan, who's the Wharton MBA guy. So that's we're going to open up the doors. I'm not sure when this will air, but some point in the fall or January or something. But just go to the website. You can find all of these. But I mean, I think the steps for changing it. It's going to vary person to person. I mean, I think one thing is really looking at those beliefs. I know one guy who is a sort of friend, but is the least successful actor I've ever met, who won't give it up. And it's clearly a whole bunch of stuff of his beliefs about, I have to do this, and it means I have to suffer, and and he has a great education. He could do other things. So I think the first step again is like self-acceptance, but it's self-examination, being how much of this is really true and how much of it have I just bought into.
When you talk about meditation, I am intimidated by meditation and yoga for that matter. Mm-hmm. Do you think that all meditators have mental chatter? Because I know that I'm not the only one that feels bad for any kind of mental blathering. So how would you say a person can, on a daily basis, clear that chatter? Or is that just part of the experience?
That is part of the experience. The most experienced meditators will tell you, and I'm not including myself in that, but the sort of big meditation gurus like Sharon Salzberg, who has endorsed a couple of things I've written, would say, that sometimes you sit down and it's about, the knee pain or something or whatever it is. So the illusion is, or the false belief is that, oh, I'm going to get really good at this and just be absolutely still. I mean, I think there are days in meditation for anyone who practices it. And there's a million forms of meditation. You might, want a guided meditation versus a silent meditation. There's walking meditation. There's activities like a movement thing that feel like a meditation and have the same effect. So the answer is that it's really about practicing it. And it's not about getting to this state of utter stillness.
Yeah, I think utter stillness is a little bit elusive sometimes, but I can't even imagine how somebody would be able to do it. But I was listening earlier to something that you had said, and basically it was just that if you don't like to do yoga, then you should be doing yoga. And I think the same thing applies for meditation. What was your yoga background like? How did you get into yoga?
Well, yoga was was always a part of my life in a kind of mostly in a sort of spiritual way, and then sort of later post-college, I was just always exposed to this, the path, and then I never really got that far along with it, and then I found one particular teacher at my NY City gym who just really resonated with me both physically and energetically, and it was at a time when I needed it, where I found both a physical experience in this intense workout, but this inner feeling that I got from her particular class that was I needed then very much. It was like a crazy time of chaos and a lot of financial chaos, actually. And I found myself going back. I didn't start out with this clear decision, I'm going to become a really famous yoga teacher. I just decided to, like, I'm going tomorrow because she's teaching. And then I did the teacher training and started teaching, and again, hadn't really intended to do that, but kept getting classes and kept reaching people, and it sort of made sense for me as a creative writer and artist to just be like doing all these classes in private. So it became more deeply woven into other things I've written, because part of it was that when it comes to the money stuff, circling back, is that what I experienced and shared as a yoga teacher was not true in any of the money books that and courses that we were talking about. None of them were really holistic. Many of them were very shaming in a way you would never be in a yoga class. Like, you can't do that. What's wrong with you? None of them, a lot of the money stuff also, unlike yoga, was very normative. I mean, there is some normative yoga, but for the most part, it's kind of like, oh, well, you could do it this way, or you could do it that way, or here's a prop. And I found so many, kind of, this is the only way to do this. This is the right financial move. So that the paths kind of intersected, because I thought, well, how can I apply what I'm sharing and learning here into these other spheres?
Yeah, that's a cool evolution. I like it. I don't know, Stephanie, I think you had some specific questions, actually.
Yeah, I like it too. Thanks for sharing that. I was just curious, like, are there any specific yoga asana poses or yoga styles or styles of meditation that you find with your students and clients are very helpful for cultivating a sense of security and calmness about money?
Well, yes and no. I mean, in some ways, they're both interwoven and separate. I mean, I'm mostly writing these days, and I teach a couple classes a week, and they're just on the weekends, just to get out of the house and reconnect with the world. But I think that it's the practice in general. Like, I mean, I actually wrote extensively in the book that hit #1, Yoga of Money for New Thought on Amazon. I used each chapter has a pose, and the pose is sort of a metaphor, and I explain the parallels. But I think it's the bigger picture, which is that what you want from the yoga practice is to feel centered, aligned within yourself, and that's what you want from for want of a better word, your money practice. Which is another part of it, which is that's another key insight which really helped me, is that yoga is referred to as a practice. It's not like you're gonna get it right and be done. Like, I can do that now, I'm done. It's more an ongoing journey, and I think that's how money should be viewed, as sort of, here's what I'm learning from this, here's where I'm going from this, here's what's shifting, here's what's easier, here's what's harder today. And the component most specifically in that world that has been most helpful, again, are the meditations. Like, I've created a bunch of guided meditations because I think those are easier for people, especially for the people who feel they can't meditate, because it's not just this scary sit down, set a timer for 20 minutes thing. I've used really great music from my friend David Bucks. There's guided stuff. They're different lengths. Some are 5 minutes, some are 10 minutes. So I think that the most powerful yoga-ish tool is learning to use some guided visualizations.
Well, that's awesome. Tatiana, do you have any more questions? I think this is a great opportunity to let Edward, let people know where they can find more of him and his books and courses.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I want to know how to visualize these things. So, Edward, can you fill us in where we should go?
Yes. So they're all over my website, and it's my name, Edward, and my last name, Vilga, which is V like victory, ILGA.com. There's a sort of several pop-ups and things under the store and free things. So, but the Meditation of the Month Club, you get a new meditation every month, and you get access to all the old ones. I started it pretty recently, and it's become very popular. And you can maybe start there. It's, always will be free. And then there's links to all of the other courses I have on DailyOM. I think DailyOM is interesting. They have a cool model where there's a couple of choices, but you can kind of pay what you want and get things. And then, more things. There's I'll be sharing as time going on. Also doing a very large course, I don't know when it's starting, for everyday health, about financial resilience, about overcoming setbacks. So that's going to be really exciting. So
yeah,
sign up
that's awesome.
Yeah, it's really interesting because everyone has them. And so whether you're super rich or super poor, and it's all about how well you respond to challenges that determines everything.
Thank you so much for making the time to speak with us today, Edward. Everybody, please make sure you go and check out his sites and go and maybe try out the meditation. I think I'm going to do that, actually. Thank you to our sponsor, Voltoro. And the Tatiana Show is on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So go to thetatianashow.com. And Proof of Love, which you're listening to now, comes out on Fridays. And you can go to proofoflovecast.com. We'd appreciate it if you share the show with your friends. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time. Bye. Show me your heart. I know that it's beating. Tell me that you love me too. So I know your heart is true. 'Cause I need some proof of love. 'Cause I need some proof of love. 'Cause I need some proof of love. Thank you for listening to Proof of Love. Please follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Proof of Lovecast. More episodes can be found at proofoflovecast.com. And make sure you leave a review on iTunes and tell your friends. Proof of Love has been brought to you by CryptoMediaHub.com, a boutique marketing and PR agency for Bitcoin and beyond. You are listening to Proof of Love with Tatiana Moroz, Dr. Stephanie Murphy, and Lauren Kasovitz. This show may contain adult content, language, and humor and is intended for mature audiences. If that's not you, please stop listening. Nothing you hear on Proof of Love is intended as financial advice, legal advice, therapy, or really anything other than entertainment. Please take everything that you hear with a grain of salt. Oh, and if you're hearing us on an affiliate network, the ideas and views expressed on this show are not necessarily those of the network that you're listening on, or of any of the sponsors or affiliate products that you may hear about on the show.